Rascal Does Not Dream of Knapsack Kid is probably one of my favorite movies of all the Bunny Girl Senpai series, and while Rascal Does Not Dream of Dreaming Girl is still up there as one of my favorite movies of all time, this movie is up there with that movie, and just because of just how emotionally beautiful and just how everything that happened in that movie was just so well done, and it really gave us a more deep insight of what was going on in Sakuta's life, the main character of this series. And I really do appreciate that we got more time to spend with Sakuta and what he was struggling, what he was dealing, because just like everyone else in this series, he didn't also have an easy life. There were a lot of hardships that he had to go through, but he always manages to get right back up and face them head on. And I'm really glad this movie exists, because believe it or not, despite the many things that we have seen from Sakuta, there are still some people who don't see him as a really good MC, and in fact there's still some people that don't really like Sakuta as a character in general, which is a shame. But hopefully after watching this video, or if you have intentions of watching the movie, this could change those people's views on Sakuta, and it could show why Sakuta is one of the best MCs of the romance genre and why he's such a great person overall. Now this video is going to contain spoilers, so if you are planning to watch this movie first, then you go right ahead, as I am going to talk about a lot of things that happen in this movie, so you have been warned. And now that that's out of the way, let's get right to it. So the movie starts off with, of course, with something that a lot of people have experienced or are going to experience at some point in their lives, and that is graduating high school. And that's exactly what would happen with Mai, as she's already in her graduation ceremony, meaning that Mai is going to finally enter the adult world and figure out what she plans to do for the rest of her life and how she wants to live her life from now on. Something that of course a lot of us have always thought about when being put in this position. But of course the main focus of this movie is of course Sakuta, as during all this, Sakuta encounters somebody that he didn't think he would ever have to encounter, or he wouldn't expect to encounter at all. And that's because when he was at the beach, he noticed a little girl, but this little girl looks a lot similar to Mai, and this is because in a way this is Mai, but when she was a child. Something that surprises Sakuta, but he becomes even more surprised where it seems that he's the only one that gets see her and nobody else, but concludes that this has something to do with adolescent syndrome. But that wouldn't be the only strange thing that he would notice, as when he was taking his shirt off, he noticed that in his skin there was a brand new scar that was completely different from the previous scars that he had. And even though he tries to figure out what this is all about and why it's happening to him all of a sudden, there's something else that Sakuta has to prioritize first before anything. And that is because his father notifies him that his mother is finally feeling better and is actually recovering very well. For those who have forgotten or just simply don't remember, Sakuta's sister, this being Kade, was sadly a victim of bullying, and because this not only severely impacted her life but also impacted her mother's life, as she couldn't deal with everything that was happening to her daughter, and this severely impacted her health, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. And for a good portion of the series, we never really knew about Sakuta's mother or how has she been ever since that whole incident, but now it seems that things have gotten a little bit better, but actually decides to make a request now that she's feeling better. And that is because in this moment, Sakuta is told by his father that their mother wants to see Kaede, something that not only shocks Sakuta but also Kaede, as of course while she is happy, she also is worried to see her mother once again due to everything that has happened between them, as most likely Kaede feels somewhat responsible for what happened to her mother's health because of what she had to go through with her bullies. But Sakuta, being the big brother that he is, assures her that there's no ill will that their mother has with her. And while Kaede was still worried, she decided to fix her resolve and be determined to see her mother once again no matter what happens, because that's the least she could do. And there is that side of her that wants to see her mother once again after all this time. But before this reunion takes place, there is some interesting dialogue that happens before all this happens, and that is when Sakuta is told if he could describe his mother, to which Sakuta responds by just simply giving a few words, saying that their mother was very chill and that she was just like any other mother that had children that she had to take care of, but also responsibilities like any other mother would. But that's just about it. And while it may not seem like a huge deal, this does foreshadow things that will happen eventually, as it does demonstrate that while Sakuta doesn't have a bad relationship with his mother, it's not to say that the relationship is all that deep and that they have an actually strong relationship between mother and son. But with all that being said, the time has finally come to once again meet their mother after such a long time without seeing her. And while at first things were awkward because rightfully so, they haven't seen each other for a very long time, having a casual conversation wasn't going to be too easy, but eventually Kaede and her mother were once again able to have a good conversation, and it seemed that the daughter and mother were starting to get along after so much time. And it seemed that Sakuta's family was once again united, but one thing that Sakuta does realize during this whole thing was the fact that he didn't really contribute much. It didn't seem that he was having a conversation with their mother, and it seemed that he was just simply there just for the sake of being there or just for the sake of Kaede. Which, while he did notice very quickly that he wasn't actually paying attention to his mother, he was at least happy that Kaede was happy, as it seemed that she was being back to her usual self. But this is where things start to get weird, and it all happened after this reunion. You see, when Sakuta was at school, he noticed that not only was his presence unnoticed by the students of the school, but also the teachers. Even when he was making noise or trying to make a scene, no one noticed his presence. And at that point, he realized that this was something to do with adolescent syndrome. And this was a very similar adolescent syndrome because this was the exact same thing that Mai was experiencing during the beginning of the series, when no one noticed her presence and it's like she didn't exist in the world whatsoever. Because of this, Sakuta starts to panic, as it seems that it's affecting everybody, not just his friends, but eventually he will come to realize when he sees Kaede and her mother that they don't even see him as well, which of course makes Sakuta realize something must have triggered this to happen. And he recalls the time when he was back with his family that his mother did not seem to notice him one bit, meaning that at this point the adolescent syndrome was already kicking in. And once he goes back to the household where they all used to live, he opens his mother's diary only to realize that his name is nowhere in the diary, meaning that he no longer exists in this world, meaning that everybody, including his own family, has forgotten about him, which greatly affects Sakuta, as the last thing he will ever want is for the people that he cares and loves to completely forget about him, and now he's all alone, all on his own. Of course, Sakuta is lost, but hope wouldn't be too lost, as he would eventually encounter the child version of Mai once again. When the child version of Mai says what he's up to, he says that he is lost, to which this leads to the child version of Mai to take his hand and take him somewhere where he wouldn't feel lost. Once Sakuta wakes up, he notices that he's in his old bedroom, but not only that, but Kaede is acting like her usual self, and she's not the only one, as it seems that their family is once again together and their mother seems to be perfectly fine, just like she always used to be. And while of course everyone is acting like their usual selves, Sakuta is of course confused and doesn't know how to process all this, which of course leads to many of the other people around him to actually wonder what is going on with him. But despite everything seeming to be normal, Sakuta notices that the scar that he still has on his skin is still there, meaning that he's still part of the adolescent syndrome. Sakuta decides to investigate further, and not only does he find out that even though he's at his old house, he's still going to the same high school that he usually goes. Not only that, but Kaede's bullying situation never happened to begin with because of him. It seems that somehow he managed to solve that conflict without anything drastic happening. Although some things are still the same, he's still friends with his girlfriend Kunimi, and he's still friends with Futaba, and he still has Mai as his girlfriend. Although something that's actually a little bit different is that he actually has a cell phone, something that he never had because he admitted it to Mai in one of their conversations that he didn't have a cell phone at all. And when he's at school, he notices that one of his middle school classmates, this being Ikumi Akagi, is in his same school. At that moment, all the pieces start coming together, and Sakuta comes to the conclusion that this is not his timeline. In fact, once he has a conversation with Futaba, this is confirmed once again that this is an alternate reality, meaning all the things that happened to him involving him, Kaede, and his mother never happened in this timeline because it seems that everything is completely fine. And while at first Sakuta is really happy and he even states that this timeline seems to be really great for him, this is not his home and he no longer feels lost. So after enough convincing by Futaba, Sakuta is determined to once again encounter the child version of Mai in order to take him back to his original timeline. And once he encounters the child version of Mai, he tells her that he wants to go back home as he no longer feels lost and he knows what he has to do. Something that child version Mai Shoganai agrees and takes him back to his timeline. Once he returns back to his own timeline, he discovers that he is still invincible to a lot of people. So it seems as things are still the same, but that would not be for too long, as there is somebody that would break the cycle since they acknowledge that Sakuta does exist, and that is none other than Mai. And the reason why Mai is the only person that knows that Sakuta exists is because of something that happened early on in the movie. There was a funny moment in which Mai tells Sakuta that somebody gave her a marriage certificate for one of her TV roles, something that Sakuta found really surprising but funny to hear, and they both decided to write their names down in this marriage certificate. So because of this, Mai knew Sakuta existed because his name was in the marriage certificate, thus breaking the cycle that nobody knew of the existence of Sakuta. This of course makes Sakuta happy, but this is where he starts to get emotional, as once they're both alone, this is where Sakuta expresses to Mai how all this time he's been worried about seeing his mother once again. As even though he does feel bad for what happened to her and he was happy to see Kaede happy finally talking to their mother once again, he also had a side of him that wasn't too great to see her, as he felt that because of everything that happened, not only were they basically forced to have a new life in a different location from where they used to live, but Sakuta had to take responsibilities that he didn't expect he would have to do early in his life. Because him and Kaede moved to a different household, it meant that Sakuta had to be the one to take care of Kaede all the time. He had to fulfill her needs and he had to always be there for her in case something happened. Something that while Sakuta got used to it, it was still something that obviously wasn't easy to do, as Sakuta was still a teenager. He still wanted to do his own things and he still wanted to have his own time for himself. But he felt that he couldn't do it, as he always had to prioritize Kaede because of everything that she went through, and that's just simply something that he couldn't ignore. But as Mai pointed out, it seemed that Sakuta truly felt that he had to be an adult at such a young age, and this moment alone gave me a different perspective of Sakuta as a character, but also as a person. We see that he was always looking out for others, and he was always putting himself last and prioritizing on the people that he cared and loved. But at the same time, while he was doing this was also still something that was bugging him. He didn't want to always have to be responsible. He didn't always want to be the one to have to act like a parent for Kaede. He wanted his own things. He wanted to enjoy his life just as much as everyone else, because everyone has one life. Everyone wants to use it to its fullest potential, because at some point everyone is going to eventually pass away, and it's how you use your life that you remember all the great memories and all the great moments in your life that you really will never forget. But sometimes there are things that happen in our lives that are very unexpected and will lead to us having to have responsibilities that we didn't think we would have to have in such a short amount of time. But for some people, that's a reality, and that's exactly what Sakuta was going through in his life. And while he does realize that this is not something that he wanted, he also realizes that this is something that you can't change, and that if he doesn't talk to his mother, the more time that goes on, the more time the adolescent syndrome is going to stay, and he is still going to be invincible to the world. So after spending time with Mai, he comes to the conclusion that he has to see his mother. He goes to the hospital ward that his mother is at, and at first things are still the same. It seems that still people can't see him, but despite this, he still vents out how he truly feels about his mother, apologizing to her for taking her for granted. And while things weren't great, he still appreciates her being his mother, as if it wasn't for her, not only would he have not existed, but he wouldn't have the life that he has now, having great people around him and have people that gives him the reason to keep on living. And just when it seems that things aren't going to change, something unexpected happens, and that is that his mother starts to notice him and sees him in her room. And while the conversation first starts casual, it gets very emotional to her mother, as he thanks him for always being there for his sister. And even though it wasn't her fault or could have predicted this situation, she still feels guilty for having to put all the responsibility on Sakuta and not being there for him. And once Kaede comes into the room, this is where things get even more emotional, as everyone starts to eventually cry, confirming that not only Sakuta and his mother had reconciled, but this would be the end of the adolescent syndrome, as now because everyone noticed his presence, it no longer means that Sakuta is invincible to the world. And that's how the movie ends. And all I gotta say that it was such a great movie from beginning to end. It really gave us a good idea of just how much Sakuta was going through and just how much he was keeping everything to himself without venting it out to anybody. And this is probably one of the biggest reasons why it makes Sakuta not only a good brother, but just a good human being. Sure, he isn't always perfect, but it doesn't mean that he's a bad person, as everything that he did and everything that he was doing for the sake of others was because he felt he had to do, or that was his responsibility all along. And even though Sakuta didn't seem to have a good relationship with his mother, it's not like he just straight up hated her. He was just frustrated that he had to take all the responsibilities and had to grow up really fast, even though he knew that his mother wasn't feeling well, and even though he knew that the things that happened with Kaede really took a toll on their mother's health. There was a tiny part of him that felt that his mother ran away from her responsibilities. Even though he hated having that mindset, there was still that part of him that felt that that was exactly the case. But then he realized that he was taking his mother for granted and that he should be glad that he still had his mother by his side. And I think a moment that really captured this was during the alternate timeline. When his mother was giving him his lunch, he said things which shocked his mother because, as she states, that he never really thanks her or says anything to her in general, which is something that caught Sakuta by surprise, but it made him realize just how his relationship with his mother wasn't that deep and they were very distant, which made probably Sakuta realize that he shouldn't treat his mother like this any longer and should spend more time with her, because at the end of the day, everyone should have a good relationship with their family, because those are the people that are always going to be there for you during the good times but also bad times in your life. And that is why this movie is so perfect, and we just have to wait and see what will happen next, as it's already been announced that there's going to be more content to be adapted from the Bunny Girl Senpai series, and all I gotta say is I can't wait for more. And yeah, that's pretty much the entire video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.